They say the hardest pain in the world is the kind that doesn't leave a bruise, the kind you can't show a doctor, the kind that settles right here in the chest and just won't move. My name is Margaret Louise Calloway. I'm 72 years old. I raised 2 children in a 3-bedroom house in Queens, New York for 41 years. And on a cold Tuesday night in November, my own son looked me in the eye and told me I'd become a burden. I walked out of his house with nowhere to go, and before midnight, 2 police officers were knocking on his front door asking about me, but not for the reason he expected. I taught 4th grade for 33 years at PS 147 right here in Flushing. 33 years of spelling bees and science fairs and little ones who cried because they couldn't get their fractions right. I stayed late every day. I bought supplies out of my own paycheck every single year. My husband Harold used to shake his head and say that I was running a charity, not a classroom, and I'd just tell him to hush. He passed 8 years ago. Heart attack. Right there in our kitchen on a Sunday morning while he was making pancakes. After that, it was just me and the quiet. Lord, the quiet. 2 years ago, my building in Astoria got sold, and I had 30 days to find somewhere else to live. My daughter Karen is out in Phoenix. 3 kids, small house, no room for me. My son Daniel called and said that I should come stay with him just while I figured things out. I remember the relief I felt when I hung up that phone. I thought, my boy, my good boy. Folks in this neighborhood always said Daniel turned out well. I believed every word of it. I should have looked a little closer. At first I told myself it was fine. I kept busy. I cooked pot roast on Sundays and chicken soup on Wednesdays. I cleaned the bathrooms. I walked Biscuit, their little beagle, every single morning while they were at work. I told myself I was pulling my weight. I told myself they were just busy people with busy lives. But then the little things started adding up. The way Linda would come right behind me in the kitchen and wipe down every counter I had just cleaned. Not because they were dirty, but because I had touched them. The way Daniel would let out this long, heavy sigh every single time he heard my footsteps on the stairs at night. I noticed every bit of it. I just never said a word. One evening I was standing in the kitchen and I heard Daniel in the next room on the phone with Linda. He said that I was only supposed to be there a few months, and that had been the plan, and that he didn't know what to do because he couldn't just kick me out, and that it had already been almost 2 years. I stood there with that dish towel in my hands for I don't know how long after he hung up. I didn't cry. I didn't make a sound. I just stood there in my son's kitchen, a kitchen I had scrubbed and cooked in 6 days a week for 2 years, and I felt something go very still inside me, like a flame quietly going out. I thought about Harold. Harold never would have said those things, but Harold was gone. And I was standing in a house where I was being counted like a bill that was past due. It was the 14th of November. I know that date by heart because it was the anniversary of the day Harold and I got married 48 years ago. I don't know exactly why I cooked such a big dinner that night. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans from scratch. I set the table properly with the cloth napkins. I suppose I was feeling sentimental. I just wanted one nice evening. I wanted to feel just for a few hours, like I was still somebody's family. I told him I had made pot roast, his favorite, and asked him to come sit down with me. He said he wasn't hungry. I told him I could tell he hadn't eaten all day and asked him to just sit for a minute. He said, "Mom, please, not tonight." And I could see something shift behind his eyes, something go cold. He set his beer down on the counter and he turned to face me. And what looked back at me was not the little boy I raised. He was a tired, selfish stranger. And he said the words I will hear for the rest of my life. He told me, quietly, like he was reading off a list, that this wasn't working, that me being there had become too much, that he and Linda needed their space back. And then he said it. He said, "Mom, you've become a burden. It's time for you to find somewhere else to go. A burden." I stood there, and I let those two words pass through every part of me. I did not yell. I did not cry. Not in front of him. I will not give anyone the satisfaction of watching me fall apart. I just nodded once, very slowly. And I told him, "All right, Daniel, I'll go." I walked out of that house at 8:47 in the evening. I know because I looked at the microwave clock as I passed it. 8:47. I had $11 in my coat pocket, an expired library card, and no plan whatsoever. I pulled my collar up against the rain and I started walking, because staying in that house one more second felt worse than anything the cold could do to me. Queens at night has a sound you don't forget, even in the rain, especially in the rain. It never truly goes quiet. Voices from somewhere above you, a horn 2 blocks over, somebody's music drifting out of a third-floor window. I've walked these streets my whole adult life, 40 years of these same sidewalks. But that night they didn't feel like mine anymore. I kept moving because that's all I knew how to do. My hip was burning. It always flares up in the cold. But I told myself, Margaret Louise, you did not survive raising 2 children and burying a husband to sit down on a wet curb in Queens. So I kept walking. I sat on that bench and I let myself think about it all properly for the first time. A burden. I thought about the night Daniel was born, a Tuesday in February, a snowstorm outside the hospital windows. I carried him home wrapped in a yellow blanket, and I stood in the doorway of his room and I thought, I would do absolutely anything for this person. And I meant it with everything I had. I worked double shifts when Harold got laid off in '98 so Daniel could stay in his dorm at SUNY. I drove 4 hours to sit beside him through his appendix surgery. I talked him through every heartbreak he ever had at 2 in the morning, never once complaining. And I asked myself, did I ever make him feel like he owed me anything? Did I ever once ask for something in return? The answer was no. I never asked him for a single thing. The one time in my life I needed a roof over my head, I became a burden. I sat with that for a long time. And it hurt like nothing I have words for. But somewhere down inside that hurt, something else was going very quiet and very hard. I just didn't understand yet what it was preparing me to do. I almost kept walking. I had my head so far down inside my own pain that night that I barely even registered the noise at first. Just another late commotion on Roosevelt Avenue, I thought. This city is full of them. But then I heard something that stopped me cold. A baby. Not a fussy baby, not a hungry baby. The kind of sound that isn't really a cry at all. the kind that goes silent in the wrong way. And something inside me just turned. The baby's name was Isabella. I found that out about 10 seconds later. She was 8 months old and she wasn't moving. The mother was screaming, really screaming. And all those people, 30 or 40 of them on that sidewalk, were just standing there recording it on their phones. And I don't know what came over me. I truly cannot explain it. My hip was on fire. My coat was soaked straight through to my skin. I was 72 years old with nowhere to sleep that night. None of that registered. I pushed through those people like they were standing in an empty hallway, and I dropped to my knees on that wet pavement, and I got to work. I took the baby gently from her mama's arms, and I asked her what the baby's name was. The mother cried out that it was Isabella and begged her, please, please, please. I told her that Isabella was going to be okay. I told her to talk to her baby, to keep talking, to let her hear her mama's voice. And I worked, quietly, methodically, the way I've done every hard thing in my life, without an audience, without a fuss, just getting it done. She cried. Oh, that baby cried. And it was the most beautiful sound I have ever heard in 72 years on this earth. I held her against my chest for just a moment and felt her little heart going like a hummingbird's. Then I handed her back to her mama, and I sat back on my heels on that cold, wet sidewalk, soaked through, hip screaming, coat ruined. And I looked up at all those people staring at me with their phones in their open mouths. And something moved through me that I hadn't felt since the moment I walked out of Daniel's house. I thought, this is what I am, not a burden, not a problem someone needs to manage. I am this. The paramedics checked on little Isabella. She was going to be just fine. Only a piece of food caught the wrong way. The mother wouldn't let go of my hand. Then a police officer came over to me, a young woman named Rivera, and she asked if I was all right and if I was hurt. I told her I was fine, because I was. I'm always fine. But then she asked me something that stopped me where I stood. She said she needed to contact my family and asked if there was someone they could call. And I just looked at her, and I said, I don't want to be a burden to anyone. She wrote something down in her notepad, and she didn't let that go. Now I want to tell you what was happening on the other end of that night, because Daniel told me himself about a week later, when he finally found the nerve to call me. He said that after I walked out, he stood in that kitchen for a long time. He said he just stood there looking at the pot roast I had made him, still on the table, still warm. He said he sat in the dark for hours after that, picking up his phone to call me a dozen times and putting it back down every single time, because he didn't know what on earth he could say. And then the knock came on the front door at 11:47 at night. He told me his heart dropped straight through the floor when he heard it. He said he threw open the door and asked right away if it was his mother, if she was all right. And Officer Rivera told him that I was safe and that I was at Queens Hospital Center, that I had refused any treatment for myself, but that I was physically okay. Daniel said he asked what happened. What did I do? And Officer Chen looked at him and said, Sir, your mother saved a child's life tonight. He told me he had to grip the door frame to keep from going down. Officer Rivera walked him through every bit of it: the crowd on Roosevelt Avenue, the baby, the 30 people who stood back and filmed on their phones, and one 72-year-old woman in a soaking wet tan coat who pushed through all of them, got down on her knees on the cold pavement, and brought a child back. Daniel said Rivera told him that witnesses were stopping her afterward, asking who the woman was, and that nobody knew. Someone had found my emergency contact card tucked inside my purse when the paramedics checked me over. His name, his address. And then Rivera told him something that Daniel said he is going to carry for the rest of his life. She said that video of what I did was already spreading online, that people all over the city were asking who I was, and that they had needed to find my family to make sure I had somewhere safe to go that night, because I had refused to tell them myself. And when they asked me why I wouldn't tell them, she said I told the officers I didn't want to be a burden to anyone. He told me he stood there in that doorway in his socks in the cold November air, and he just broke completely open. He couldn't speak. He said Officer Chen put a hand on his shoulder and waited. And Daniel told me the only thought in his mind the whole time, the only image he could see, was me standing in his kitchen at 8:47 that evening, nodding quietly and saying, "All right, Daniel, I'll go." He said that image was going to haunt him for the rest of his life. I thought, good. I thought that very clearly. Not to be cruel, but because some things need to haunt a person long enough to actually change them. I heard him before I saw him. That walk, I'd know it anywhere. Fast and a little heavy on the left foot, just like his father always walked. I looked up and there he was, coat soaked through, hair stuck to his forehead, looking at me like I was something he had almost lost and couldn't quite believe was still there. And I'll be honest with you, there was a part of me, a proud and stubborn old part, that thought about turning away, about making him stand there and earn every inch of it. But then I looked at his face, and he got down on one knee on that hospital linoleum floor. He said Mom over and over. He said he was sorry, and that he didn't mean it, and that he was stressed and selfish, and that he had taken everything I am for granted his entire adult life, and that he said the worst thing a son can ever say to his mother, and that he knew he couldn't take it back. He was barely making sense, and I looked down at this man who was once a 3-day-old baby in a yellow blanket in my arms, and I said, "Daniel, get up off that floor." He tried to keep talking, and I said, "Get up. People are staring at you, and you look absolutely ridiculous." And somehow, through everything, we both almost laughed. Almost. We sat there for a long time without saying much of anything. The hospital hummed around us, monitors beeping somewhere down the hall, a cart rolling past, a child crying 2 rooms over. A doctor came by and told me my hip was fine. Nothing broken, just bruised and angry. I told her it was always angry. She laughed. Daniel didn't. He just held that cup and looked at the floor, and I looked at the side of his face, the gray coming into his hair now, the lines around his eyes that weren't there 10 years ago. And I saw all of him at once. The baby, the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, the college kid who called me crying at 2 in the morning when his first girlfriend left him. All of him still in there, underneath the tired grown man who had lost his way a little. I thought, this is what family does. It breaks itself open, and then it has to decide whether it wants to heal. We decided to heal that night. It isn't finished. I don't imagine it will be finished for a long time. But on that bench, we decided. At my age, you learn things they don't put in any book. You learn that strength is not something you carry when everything is going fine. Strength is what rises up in you when your own child has just told you that you're not wanted, and you walk out into the rain anyway with your head held up. When your hip is on fire and your coat is soaked through, and you have $11 in your pocket and nowhere to sleep, and you still drop down on your knees on a cold, wet sidewalk for a stranger's baby, that is not bravery. That is just who I am. That is who I have always been. And it took a November night in the rain on Roosevelt Avenue to remind me of it. They say blood is thicker than water. Maybe so. But I've come to believe that love, real love, has to be chosen. Every single day. My son chose me back that night, and I chose him too. That is how family works when it works at all. You fall. You break each other in ways you cannot fully undo. And then you choose. You wake up the next morning and you choose again. I am Margaret Louise Calloway, 72 years old, retired school teacher, widow, mother, grandmother of 5. I have walked every street in this borough. I have outlasted harder winters than this one, and I am nobody's burden. I never was. If my story touched your heart today, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe it's a mother, maybe it's a son, maybe it's someone who has been told they are too much, when really the world just isn't strong enough to hold them. Share it, because some stories were never meant to stay quiet. And if you want to hear another story about family and regret and the kind of second chances that change everything, click the video on your screen right now. I'll be waiting for you there.